Test, 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 test.
Reminds me of when I
Here we
had
go.
5 units microbiology, 5 units soil science,
Clay.
5 units of organic chemistry the same.
Thank you, Clay. Yeah. Good afternoon. We're going to call the meeting to order. So if we'll all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Ready, salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item is roll call, starting on my right. Kevin.
Kevin here. Jerry Kaczynski. Clay Dalton. Jim Maxwell.
Devin Avilas.
Bill Dietrich. Ben Pittman.
Vicky Ortiz.
Brian Elkins.
Lisbeth Oletz.
Thank you. Item number 4, public comment. The first 15 minutes of each regular session is set aside for members of the public to comment on any item within the jurisdiction of the committee, but not appearing on the agenda. For items appearing on the agenda, the public is invited to comment at the time the item is called for consideration by the committee. Any person addressing the committee under public comment will be limited to a 3-minute presentation to ensure that all interested parties have an opportunity to speak. Please submit any handouts to the recording secretary. Do we have any public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 5, update on subbasins and calendar. Greg Young.
That would be me, huh? Pull up the presentation. Good afternoon, everybody. This might seem a little repetitive for some of you, but the intent here is to highlight the Chowchilla subbasin. At the prior advisory committee, we went through the Madera Basin in detail. So this is a similar presentation, but representing the Chowchilla subbasin. Total subbasin area, as we see here on the map, is about 146,000 acres, 123,000 irrigated acres. The Madera County GSA portion is about 45,000, of which about 37,000 is irrigated, and that's subdivided into 2 areas called the east and the west area, and you can see their acreage is up there and about the approximate irrigated portion, most of the west area is irrigated, and the east area has some of the grazing land. And when you look on the map here, the blue color, so this blue right here is considered Madera County West, and this blue kind of sparsed out is Madera County GSA East. Additionally, in the Chowchilla subbasin is the Chowchilla Water District, which is all this center part and a couple other areas, Triangle T Water District, and a little bit of Merced County, which falls right in here. To give a sense of the scale of each one of those, these are the 4 GSAs, and in this, let me also add, because I don't think it's in the next slide, that this subbasin is doing 1 GSP for these 4 GSAs. So you have Chowchilla Water District GSA, Madera County GSA for Chowchilla, Merced County GSA, and the Triangle T Water District GSA. Those 4 entities have put together 1 groundwater sustainability plan that is also out for review. If you recall, in the Madera subbasin, 4 GSAs, Madera County, Madera Irrigation District, City of Madera, Madera Water District were doing 1, and then there were 3 separate GSPs also being done for that basin. So in this basin, it's all covered under 1 GSP. And this is about the split out of the acreage. Again, you can see the Madera County East and West. And Sierra Vista Mutual Water Company is one of the participants. It's kind of a sub-region, and they're a little bit both in Madera County and Merced County, represent about 3,800 acres. The distribution here of crops, similar to the discussion for the Madera subbasin, you can see there's been an increase from the 89 land use to the 2015 land use of consumptive use of applied water. pretty significant amount here, with the big change being a massive reduction in the kind of annual idled land. That doesn't mean that was land that was always idled. That's part of the rotational idling that was probably occurring. And a big jump in the almonds, and pistachios also went up, and then a big drop in the pasture and alfalfa. So the resulting effect of the cropped area and the average ET here is similar to what we're seeing in the Madera subbasin. City of Chowchilla and the rural residential areas also have some consumptive use in in that subbasin. In the Chowchilla subbasin, our projected shortage without handling the GSP, if there was no Sigma, we were projecting about 115,000 acre foot of annual shortfall. I just realized that 165 number did not get changed. So the 4 GSAs are doing the one entire basin, and the projected shortfall should not be 165, it should be the 115. Apologize, that's carryover from the prior. The public comment is open until November 11th, just like with the other subbasin, and the document is available on MaderaCountyWater.com/Chowchilla subbasin, and you can find all the pieces of that GSP located there for any comment. The plan is to manage the overdraft through a combination of projects and demand reduction. And again, the significant amount of demand reduction is going to be within the Madera County east and west areas because they didn't have alternative sources of water, unlike the Chowchilla Water District. So similar situation to the Madera Subbasin, Madera County portion of Madera Subbasin. For the Madera County GSA, the actions detailed in this groundwater sustainability plan, again, significant reduction in demand, recharge where feasible, likely with only localized benefits, high cost and likely impacts to the county economy. So all those things are being considered and tried to roll in while we transition over the period of implementation from 2020 to 2040. Focus of recharge along the basin. Here's some estimated average annual benefits. This is pretty significant. This means that every 3 to 4 years or so, you're going to try and capture 70, 80,000 acre feet of water and get it onto land. That's a lot of infrastructure to get that done. Recharge in the east areas, probably in coordination with Chowchilla Water District. Irrigating with surface water in the east area, again, probably in coordination with Chowchilla Water District, getting water extended beyond some of their facilities. And then demand reduction, a steady increase out to 2040 of about 1,400 acre feet a year, up to about a total of 28,000 acre feet of demand reduction in that subbasin. Demand reduction considerations. Again, this is a plan to have some gradual phase in. How exactly we do this, we have a variety of things we've been discussing. We're not trying to answer that in the GSP at this point. There'll be continued discussions about how to implement demand reduction. But starting in 2020 and continuing through 2025, probably average annual reduction by about 2%, similar to the Madera subbasin, with trying to get a cumulative reduction of about 10%. Groundwater pumping will be reduced by about 6% per year following that. However, if we are able to do either more or less project yields from capturing water supplies, that number is going to go either up or down to try and manage for the basin. Bless you. Some things to consider for this advisory committee when we talk about demand reduction is the administrative and regulatory burden for the growers, the administrative burden for the county GSA and how we try and track and manage water. Individual economics, county GSA economics, county overall economics, when we start including, now in this case it would be Chowchilla Water District and the benefits they have to the county, and flexibility and adaptability of the approach to modify to assure we are meeting our targets. So in other words, when we're developing things, we don't necessarily want to become rigid. If there's opportunities to maybe modify in the future to get a better result, we'd want to be able to allow ourselves to do that. We do recognize, just like within the Madera subbasin, that the transition from 2020 to 2040 of reducing demand will likely have an ongoing slow reduction in groundwater levels until we start to recover with the demand being reduced, and with projects coming online, we start to see recovery. So this graphic here, again, similar to what we've discussed for the Madera Subbasin. The blue dots are actual historic groundwater levels at a particular location. This is a sample well for illustrative purposes. The brown you see here is the model trying to simulate what's been happening. And throughout all the different wells that were included in these various models in both basins, there was fairly decent correlation that this can be useful to help us understand direction. We're not trying to say this gives us the exact answers, but it's direction. And what the direction said is, as we start to, assuming kind of average conditions with some wet and some dry years over the next 20 years of implementation, we're going to see some continued dropping of groundwater levels, and then we should start to see a recovery. And then as we're doing recharge projects, capturing high flow years, and then going into drought cycles and stuff, you're going to see this fluctuation. But our average management objective should be demand levels that are probably, you know, in the earlier 2000s, 2010 to 2015 range is probably where we're going to be operating, as opposed to a continued glide path downward if we didn't have Sigma. So with that, we're expecting there could be some reduced demands, and that might result in some impacts to domestic wells. So we've talked about, I think I'm jumping ahead there, potentially doing some mitigation and structuring a mitigation program to protect domestic wells. In this particular graph, this line down here says domestic well average top perforation at 340 feet in this particular case, and domestic well average depth is below that. You see the threshold that was set for this well, which again, the regulations require you set a minimum threshold at every representative monitoring well. In this particular case, the domestic wells that are in the section or two around this location are all perforated below where we expect it to go. So we shouldn't see any problem of domestic wells in this particular case. Granted, that would assume that we have all the right data about the domestic wells that are out here, and sometimes, well, we probably know that that data is not exactly the best because it was data from the state, and it's missing some things. So in other places, the domestic well numbers might be up here, and so there is this potential where we could drop below, which is why we need to have a mitigation program developed so we can address those concerns. Groundwater impacts would be much greater without the GSP. So as an example, groundwater levels would drop another 150 to 200 feet by 2090. 100 plus feet of that would probably occur during the implementation period. So even though, jumping back to this graph, we're going to see some reduction, in this particular example, it's, you know, this is each one of these horizontal lines is about 50 feet, so you might be seeing upwards of 50 feet. Without any action, we would be seeing levels probably dropping 100 plus feet during that same period. With the GSP, that levels will be temporarily dropping, but would recover and stabilize at current levels or even better by 2040 and into the future. And for each subbasin, levels could be, for the Chowchilla, about 50 feet lower than current, or about 15 feet lower than recent lows, noting that current, it's come back up since like the low of 2015. And Madera Basin was about 30 feet lower than current, or about 20 feet lower than the recent lows, just to provide some context on that. GSAs are considering the mitigation program that I did just chat about. We'll be developing that. This advisory committee has an ad hoc group looking at the domestic well questions, and we'll be bringing back some thoughts for this body to consider. Some possible mitigating actions could be replace or lower existing wells or connect to community water system, and there may be other solutions there. Possible types of support could include loans, grants, a variety of other things. Again, there's a group working that will bring something back to this body. Likely will require owners to sign up for the program so we know where people are. What we don't, obviously we can't try and mitigate for something we don't even know exists, so we're going to need to try and understand where wells are. And at one of the ad hoc discussions, we chatted some about how to start getting our arms better around some of that data and maybe some ways to look through that. So there's some steps starting to move forward. Madera County GSA layers of cost. Do you, Stephanie, want to touch on this one, or do you want to just wait until your next set of slides, I think?
So we foresee 3 layers of costs, broadly speaking. One of them is that we are relying a lot on recharge, both temporary recharge, on-farm recharge, and then permanent basins. In order to convey the flows to those places, we rely on a flood control agency, which is underfunded and undermanned. So there may be a 218 assessment for the flood control agency. We currently have a working group that's going to provide some feedback on that. So that would be layer 1. The flood control agency, by the way, is a county-wide effort. It's not connected to the GSA. Then we have a GSA fee, which I'm going to talk a little bit more in a later presentation. And then there are project fees. So we would need to go through a separate 218 project when we are building infrastructure. And we could do a 218 for a number of different things, like water purchases as well, but that's a separate fee. Like, anything you want to add?
Not right now.
Okay.
So just a quick update again on the Madera County GSA current activities. While the GSPs are out for public review, we're starting to try and look towards implementation things that we anticipate will be needed right out of the gate for implementation of the GSP and the plan. So the activities revolve around supplies, monitoring and reporting, and implementation efforts altogether. The water supplies, we are continuing some conversations with the Bureau of Reclamation to modify the county's contract to expand the place of use so we can have access to federal water, Section 215 water, or even other CVP transfer waters to lands within the rest of the GSA boundaries in both the Madera and the Chowchilla subbasins. Currently, we can't do that. We're also talking with DWR, getting some technical assistance and hopefully ultimately some grant assistance on recharge opportunities under using the acronym that they've developed of FloodMAR, MAR standing for Managed Aquifer Recharge. Monitoring, reporting, and recording. We are continuing some discussions and kind of monitoring what's going on in some other basins about the satellite-based analysis for ET. There's several basins that I think are starting to look to contract with Cal Poly for their metric process. I don't know what the right term is there, their methodology to use satellite-based analysis, and likely we'll look to try and get something that will help us give maybe 17, 18, 19 water consumptive use data, and then we can use that as a basis as we start to move forward to start hopefully tracking a reduction in demand on consumptive use. There is an RFP that's out and has been reviewed, and I think potentially interviews being scheduled for a database RFP. Stephanie, you want to add anything more to that? Okay. All true. The GSA management and administration funding is also moving forward as under Prop 26. And so that would be to try and, you're going to talk more about that fund later in this presentation. Water Smart Grant, I believe the county has signed that contract with the Bureau of Reclamation and can now start moving forward with the selected contractor to investigate opportunities or what might work on any kind of groundwater trading, recognizing we haven't set up any, nor even have decided whether it's right to set up any kind of allocation mechanism. There was an opportunity to secure some outside dollars, almost 2 years ago that the county went after and was granted some monies to help investigate these things. So that'll at least help put some more frame around what might work and what might not work if we do proceed with any kind of allocation now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. It'll be useful information and insight into a variety of things about how you might kind of structure a groundwater trading mechanism. Also, the GSA implementation funding. Why am I blanking on that bullet? Is there anything important there? That's the 218 process, okay, that you'll be talking about. So Sorry, wrong button. One more slide, and then we're going to jump over to some other materials. The 5-year action plan, hopefully everybody can read the details here. Yes, it was a joke. We recognize as this GSA that our partners in both basins need to understand that we are serious about moving ahead with actions. And the best way to try and start demonstrating that is putting together essentially a work plan. So we are organizing a work plan based on time. This has annual years across the top and several categories of things from the GSP itself, which includes submitting it and working on annual reports, et cetera, to financing and revenue, to studies, to projects, and there's programs and there's targets, demand reduction targets are all part of this 5-year plan. We'll be discussing more details about that at a later advisory committee meeting, but it essentially is trying to say, look, this is what we're putting forth in the kind of the time frame of when we're going to be addressing major efforts that will help us implement the projects that are outlined in the GSP. So now I think we just jump to a discussion before we go into the next agenda item. So anything, Devin, back to you.
Thank you, Greg. Any comments from the committee? Kevin?
I have a question. I remember us beating up an awful lot the 2% reduction for the first 5 years, but I don't recall us talking about the 6% reduction starting in year 6, and I'm just wondering where that came from because it seems rather draconian. So is that a staff recommendation, or the supervisors did that, or did we talk about it and I forgot, or what happened?
So there's as we've discussed overall, there's kind of a bucket we need to get down to. So we're consuming a big number and we need to get to a smaller number. And if we do 2% per year for those first 5 years, the 6% represents the rest of the glide slope to get the rest of that on just a linear basis. So it was done
evenly distributed.
Yeah, linearly distributed. It was used in the model to try and understand. So that graph that we showed representing the anticipated groundwater levels anticipates a reduction in crops associated with that kind of glide path, simply again for purposes of trying to understand order of magnitude of what we need to do. So I think those first 5 years are going to be key to be able to understand what can get done and where that's starting to balance with other projects, and we can then determine what that rest of that path needs to look like.
But with the current knowledge that we have, there was no way for that 6% to be anything less.
Well,
With
so
the difference we have
if
to
we
make.
could maybe take a moment to kick that around, because using I call my farmer math, I round off. So bear with me on not being too exacting here. We're going to ultimately we need to lower our pumping by about 75%, from about 2 acre-feet to about a half. So using that as a benchmark of a 75% reduction over 20 years, we're going to get a 10% reduction, a total over the first 5. And if you increased it to 4%, the second 5.
Can I interrupt you to just give you the math real quick on how the
Sure.
6%? So 10% leaves us 90% left.
Okay.
90% divided by 15 years is 6% per year.
Yeah, but that's getting you to 0. That's not getting you to the 75%.
That's getting us to the 100% of our reduction. So
Okay.
it depends on which percentage we're talking about. So year 4 to whatever number
Yeah.
comes out in that math is probably the reduction related to what's still being consumed versus the entirety of 100 to 0 of the reduction. Does that make sense? So our numbers, the 6% that's represented there and the 2% getting to the 10% over 5 years is about the reduction from, our 2.3 acre-feet down to half, or essentially, what are we, 200,000 acre-feet of consumption down to 100,000 acre-feet of consumption, round numbers.
Okay.
So that makes,
I have to think about that one.
okay.
It's having a hard time sinking in.
So it was simply the remaining 90%
Okay.
divided by 15 years.
Okay. Thank you.
I thought at that meeting where we established the 2%, there was some consideration given to the fact that over the next 5 years, a great deal more water would be percolated to mitigate the 6%?
Are you describing the additional, the projects we're looking to try and bring in recharge and everything?
Yes.
That with those recharge projects, if you recall our prior discussions, even with all the recharge that were shown on the table a little bit ago for Chowchilla and the similar table for Madera, we still have significant reduction that has to occur, even if we capture all of those recharge projects. Now, trying to do a bunch of recharge projects in 5 years, including getting the water rights, getting the infrastructure built, getting through CEQA, whatever might be necessary, funding, that's going to be, those things are going to start 5 years, 10 years, 15 years before we're seeing those. So maybe we can be more successful, that ultimately we can have bring some lands back, but there may be an interim where we definitely have to continue going hard on demand reduction because we can't build nor get enough water.
And piggybacking on that comment, I just want to point out that the advice from this committee, as well as the Board of Supervisors, is to be super aggressive about finding new sources of water and harnessing water that flows by on the bypass. So that was our starting point for this discussion, was bring as much as you can in. At that point, once we brought in as much as we can, and we've been criticized for being too aggressive by others, that's where the demand reduction came in. And so it's a stopgap measure because we cannot make up the difference in found new water.
Jerry?
It looks like the demand reduction then is 1-to-1 for the acreage reduction. Is that correct? Meaning that we're not tied to any kind of a pumping level. We're just taking crops out of the picture so that there's less acreage. I mean, we've kind of backed into that position.
I think again, the basin, to become sustainable, the basin in its entirety, and we can use Madera or Chowchilla, I don't care if there's a preference on which one we want to talk about as a proxy here. Each one of those basins has generally an irrigation district that has a large amount of surface water opportunities and sources, and then a bunch of area that only has groundwater. The basin in its entirety is overdrafted. So we need to reduce the likelihood of the amount of surface water those water districts have generally puts them in a pretty good place that they can keep pumping only at native levels and use all their surface water and be okay, which leaves the rest of the area to absorb the rest of the reduction for the entirety of the basin. So how that exactly gets translated, whether it's some, across the board acreage reductions, whether it's certain areas or, exactly that's part of the discussions we've had before, whether it's allocations, fees, what we do, we have a challenge in front of us to reduce demand and to try and do it in a way that provides flexibility for all the business decisions that need to continue on over the next 20 years and the considerations of the economy of the county overall. I don't think that really answered your question, but nonetheless, I said it. So if there's a clarifying question you want to make, that I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to take into account that we could come up with improved irrigation techniques and keep the same acreage and reduce groundwater, at least for some foreseeable.
I appreciate that clarification. Yes, the analysis and the numbers that we're looking at are all talking about consumptive use reduction. So you could get 100% efficient, but if you're still consuming the same amount, we're over-consuming. And so we need to reduce the consumption that's going primarily to the atmosphere through crop transpiration. And that's the challenge. So, and just as a side note, this was a big problem that Arizona is facing right now because their laws that they put on the books 2-3 decades ago grandfathered in quantity of pumping. And so people did exactly that. Oh, I can become more efficient. And they did, and they expanded acreage, and now they have a worse problem. And now CAP the Central Arizona Project is cutting back more, and they're having a significant problem. And land is now starting to come out of production, and there's some major issues going on. But because they looked at just the pumping, and everybody got more efficient, and the consumption actually went up, which exacerbated the overdraft.
Anything else, Trey? Clay, anything else? Jim? Kevin, follow up?
Follow up. So, Greg, we're talking about wanting to go in the county from what, 160,000 acre feet to 80? And that's how we come up with 100% in round numbers?
Round numbers for Madera Subbasin was about, I think, 200,000, or 180,000 consumption going down to 90,000 consumption.
So look,
Somewhere
that's
on
why
that.
100%.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that reduction, we need to do over 20 years, and we said we'll do the first 10 in 5 years and the other 90% over 15 years. And so that was,
Okay. I don't know if the horse is out of the barn on this or not, but the thing that concerns me about the 6% is, we have that in writing, and it potentially could become reality, and it could be difficult to change. So does it make any sense to put in there estimated 4 to 6% reduction in the second 5 years, depending upon the results that we achieve in the first 5?
Well, there's definitely language in there that says we're doing adaptive management and that we are able to change, and if we're able to bring in, surprise, a lot more water, then that's reduced. You're not married to the 6% if that's the case.
Yeah. Well, then perhaps we could give it a range.
Well, the 6% is what went in the model. So I think they're
Okay.
reporting how they modeled being able to get to sustainability. And I think the folks who are in the partnership to do the GSP would have some really strong feelings about backing away from that.
I think that said, I think the GSP also just says the management action of demand reduction says we're trying to get to this magnitude, and it's approximately in a linear approach. And I don't think it defined, I don't believe it put in the exact percentages.
It did.
It did? Did it put in the 6?
Yep.
Sorry, I'm reading too many of these things. But I think
Chapter 4.
there is there's, the key, I think, the takeaway and what Stephanie is noting here is that maybe it may be 4 to 6%, but that would just be, we still got to be making progress on an annual basis. We can't go, well, let's just do 1% for 15 years and then decide to do 85% in the last year, or the last 5 years. That's not going to work.
I'm not suggesting that.
Yeah.
I'm suggesting that if we have some really beneficial results, that it might be better to give it a range instead of a specific number.
So you can amend your plan at any time. So if we had a lot of water coming in, we would do a plan amendment. That would be the safest, most protected thing to do. And that would get those numbers lower with sufficient water coming in. But I think we want to present this as a very strong plan to DWR, because if you look at the alternative plans that were submitted, there were a fair number of those that were not accepted, which is pretty much an emergency. So we want to make sure that we have something that says we're taking this demand reduction piece seriously.
And that it's believable. And I think coming back to the point that Stephanie noted, that at the 5-year mark, you're allowed to update, well, you can really update any point in time, but definitely at the 5-year mark, there's a GSP update. The other thing is all of this really ties to the minimum thresholds and the management objectives, and we're trying to implement things so that we see this groundwater level stabilizing or maybe even improving. If, we're starting to track things, and for whatever reason, maybe we have 10 straight years of 2017 water conditions, we may find that we're in a good spot where we don't have to be rushing anything. But that's going to be told to us on an annual reporting as we're monitoring all these groundwater levels. So the rest of this, you got to look at it as, this is a big plan, 60,000 feet in the air. This is the direction we're going. This is probably the rate we're going to have to try and get to. This is how much we think we have to do in rough numbers. We're going to watch this. We're going to be tracking it. We're going to be monitoring. We're going to start implementing right away because our partners in these basins want to see us taking action. recognizing that we may be able to adjust and not have to go as far, or we may also, the flip side is, have to go further at some point. So I think flexibility is within the whole thing, and I understand the concern about a number now becomes permanent in some manner, but I think there's enough flexibility and recognition of that, that really the goal is watching those water levels. That's really what we're going to be keying off of as we go forward. Does that help give you any kind of sense of?
I understand what you're saying. I just, and if I'm the only guy who's bothered by this, I'll just leave it alone. But if other folks feel that
We
way.
haven't gotten on this side yet, Kevin.
Okay, but if other people feel this way, I'd consider making a motion to amend that.
Bill?
Give Jim a chance first. Jim? He already passed. Oh, he did, okay, all right. Couple questions. The layering of cost, when we had that discussion. I'm very concerned at how far out we're getting with our Prop 218s. And this might be for Mike as much as it is for you, but it seems like we need to get serious funding sooner than later. And I think it looks to me like when you're looking at money for implementation of the projects, that money won't be coming into the county until if we can pass the 218 election, that money won't be coming into the county until December of 2022.
I think you could potentially do it sooner, in December of 2021.
To have actual money coming in from the
For
tax roll.
a 218 for projects, as long as you pass as long as the Board of Supervisors passes the fee, so that we have money to do the studies, to do the 218.
Because my mind keeps coming back to quantification of the implementation of the 2% per year. And it seems to me like that's going to be an extremely difficult challenge for us to quantify that for our GSP partners. And I've already had, I have gotten messages from them that they're concerned about that. And so for me, if there's any way to step that up, because it seems to me like the discussion that we've been having among the advisory committee is that it's going to take serious money to have a program where we have volitionary fallowing. And if anybody on the committee, if I'm misinterpreting what the direction this committee's going, please tell me. But the sooner that happens, the better. Obviously, there's a process that we have to get through, and then we have to sell the idea so that the 218 would pass. But to be able to quantify a 2% reduction without fallowing land, without putting meters on and, cutting off half the trees or 2% of the trees a year, I don't know how else you do it. So that's my primary, that was my primary comment today, is that seems like that's of utmost urgency, that we get serious money into the county. For a couple meetings back, someone mentioned voluntary, paid land retirement. So that's all I got right now. Thank you.
So just to quickly respond, we are going to talk later about the GSA fee, which would give me the funds in order to do the study for that 218. So it's top of the list for work for next year, but it needs to come from a GSA fee so that people within the GSA are paying for it and not the county general fund.
So you have additional presentation today for that?
I do.
I'm sorry, I forgot ahead of you then. Thank you.
Ralph?
Just a couple questions just a couple questions. What percent of the county's income comes from agriculture? Would you have a general idea?
I'm going to go with
Taxes, whatever it is, jobs, economy. The total economy of the county, what percent would you say comes from agriculture?
I would not say I would go
It would
with
be
that.
pretty important to understand what that number was.
No, and we've done a pretty substantial economic analysis, but I want to make sure that we capture all the costs because as you know, it's not just the crops, it's the ancillary businesses as well,
Right,
that are processing
exactly.
things.
So-
So I would not want to give you an answer right now, but I can talk to Stevie, the ag commissioner.
Okay, all right. So basically what you're talking about is reducing the total agricultural productivity of the county by 50%. That's what you're talking about doing. In the 40-year period or 20-year period, it's 50%. If you reduce the water, you reduce the production. And the
Could I
evapotranspiration.
pause just a second? The 50%, how are you coming up with that value?
Well, because you're going from 180,000 acres to, or the
Consumption,
the
acre-foot of
acre footage,
consumption
you want to
to
reduce
90.
the water about
Okay,
half.
that's what I thought you were going. So recognize the GSA in both of the subbasins also include Chowchilla Water District and Madera Irrigation District, who both have substantial agricultural operations and benefit to the county, and they are not seeing any, or at least not significant changes or reductions in consumptive use because of their surface water assets. So when the county GSA is a sub-area, and so that's why I was wanting to pause you
Okay,
because.
I got you what
because
you're
there's-
talking about. You're saying it's not the whole thing.
It's
I'm
not the
saying
entire county, right.
Our group here is the white area. All right. Okay, so the white area is maybe half of the county, approximately. So what I'm saying is, whatever this white area produces is substantial. And so when you cut it in half, that's a big hit on the county. That's a big hit. So while you're trying to comply with whatever mandate we don't know who put on us, you're actually killing yourself. And the evapotranspiration that you guys are talking about, you cannot, I know you guys farm, but a tree needs what it needs. A vine needs what it needs. You can cut it back a little bit, but you can't cut it back forever. You require so much water every day to live on. It's no different. A tree is the same thing, right? Okay, so we have to figure out if you're going to keep the county economically productive, you got to figure out a mechanism to keep that income flow from those properties viable over a long period of time. You have to retire land that maybe is not so improved. You got to pay them for it. All right? This is something that, it might be an idea that only makes sense to us, but it's got to make sense to all the people that have to pay for it too. How are we going to go about getting their input in this deal? Or is it going to be just a committee making a recommendation and the Board of Supervisors making a mandate?
So the committee next year, in whatever form it exists, would give feedback on implementation of the GSP, and we would have public meetings. That's where we would get feedback, and then we also go to other meetings and do presentations when we propose ideas. So that's how we would go about doing it.
All right. There's something that came up in the semi-tropic water district that I saw on one of your slides you had satellite analysis for ET. Well, an ET, evapotranspiration, I take it, right? Okay, all right. I had a discussion with semi-tropic. I'm in semi-tropic. And what they did, they went and they had their satellites fly over properties. I didn't know they were flying over properties. They're flying over properties, right? And they're taking whatever measurements they're taking, about the size of this room, pixels of land. And they're doing evapotranspiration, all right? And they got some numbers or some stats on that. And then the semi-tropic took all the crops
and they figured out all the acre feet of water per acre per crop. They took all the land, they divided it by the acres, they came out with 3.18 acre feet per acre. Okay? Average across everything. Then what they did, they said, if you fall over 3.18, we're going to penalize you. If you fall under 3.18, we're going to give you a check. All right, I didn't think that was too cool, because you could be 100th of an acre foot over and you receive a $100,000 bill, and you could be 1/10 of an acre foot under, you might receive a $100,000 check. Made no sense at all, didn't accomplish anything, other than they're trying to placate the State Water Resources Board that they're doing something to discourage water use. And they're an irrigation district that's supposed to be a water bank to put water in the ground. So I saw that come up on your screen, and I'd like you to tell me how you would use satellite analysis in Madera County and for what purpose.
So the short version is we would probably use it to estimate how much water you're using. And at some point, if we went to a rate in which there is an amount that you're charged per acre foot, we would have a good idea of how much water you're using. That said, in my experience, it takes a fair amount of back and forth with people about exactly what land they have and what we don't know. So that probably couldn't happen for at least a year, but that would be the intent of the satellite data. You want to add anything, Greg?
Yeah, we are going to need to be able to demonstrate a reduction in consumptive use. And there's only a couple of ways to really do that, and that is meter everybody and trust every meter that's on every well and that we know every well, and understand what other source of water was used for that property, like it may have had a riparian right or something like that, right? And understand how much groundwater that particular parcel used. That is plausible. It's also probably extremely challenging for this basin to try and deal with that. Satellite analysis that's being done, that Semi-Tropic use, that a lot of places are adopting, is getting to be a more and more well recognized estimate, key estimate by, as you said, a pixel that's about the size of this room, of
Right.
estimating how much demand came off of that, regardless of what the crop was. And it'd be able to say that your pistachio crop versus yours, you guys use different actual consumption because you irrigated differently than he irrigated, or your soils were different, and they'd be able to tell that. We'd want to use that information to help us, if we define a fee structure that says you pay for so many chunks of water you use, so maybe every half acre foot or a quarter acre foot or some sort of fee structure, if we put that on to help generate money and to help us implement the project, maybe that's the structure, and then we look at what that analysis says, and it says, Ralph, you used 3.5, you consumed 3.5 for your crop, Devin consumed 3.2 for his crop. You go to the fee structure, you're going to pay a little bit more. Even though you're growing the same thing, you're going to pay a little bit more because you consumed a little bit more water. That's one way we may use that information. Now, if we instead decide at some point that an allocation mechanism is appropriate, then we may look at it and say, you were only allocated 3, and you used more than that, so now here's some sort of, penalty aspect.
Why don't they just do it with pricing? Just price the water.
But what are you pricing? How do we know what you're pricing? So if I price the water and I say it's $50 for the first acre foot, $100 for the next acre foot, just complete hypothetical, how do I know how much you actually used?
No, price the water, and if it's too high, I'll be paying for it if I used it.
I understand, but how do I know you're using it or not?
Because I take it through the turnout, and you know what I did. If you price the water.
What groundwater well turnout do I know that you have?
Oh, groundwater. All right, we're
Right?
talking about groundwater.
We're talking about
All right, well,
groundwater. We're not an
semi-tropic is a
irrigation
lot.
district.
All right,
Semi-tropic has the advantage also of having contract water supplies, both through Kern County Water Agencies, Kern Water Rights, and the State Water Project. And they've given an allocation of 4 different classes of entities. Those who pay for the contract surface water, those who only pay the groundwater supplement fee, and then they have a duck club category, and then they have people who are considered native. In other words, they don't pay anything. Each one of those has different increments of allocation initially, and then that ramps down over time. So if you're buying into the surface water, you get more all the way through the day than me, who is probably trying to get by only on groundwater. I'm going to see a reduction.
well, semi-tropic, for the most part, what we're using is surface water, all right? And the evapotranspiration, it's a water bank, so you put the water in, it goes into the ground, all right? It has a water bank with Metropolitan. Metropolitan, for the water we put in, they can pull out 90% of it, all right? Why don't they put a satellite over LA and see how efficient they are with their gardens and their lawns and everything, and maybe let them, instead of pull out 90%, pull out 70%. See what I'm saying?
So I understand a lot of what you're saying. What we have to deal with is our basin's issue right now. I mean, there's a lot of things that you may want to tell Sacramento to do differently that would be maybe great ideas, but the reality is we have this in front of us right now.
Yeah.
And we're trying to figure out how can we start to proceed down the path of reduction, right? And so this conversation seems to be boiling out of 2%, 6%, any of these kind of things of some sort of demand reduction.
Just to note that Land IQ does do urban water analysis, and the state is doing exactly what you're saying and giving urban water suppliers, the water agencies, a budget based on some pretty low indoor water numbers and some pretty low outdoor numbers.
Okay.
So that's actually a thing that exists.
Yeah, 2025, they will be starting to be held accountable at for urban purveyors to that water budget.
Yeah, I know, they got some technology. If something leaks, they know.
So what we have is, what Semi-Tropic is doing is a allocation per acre by a certain land class based on what you're paying in at the district. So they're doing an allocation, per acre allocation basis. Native water is spread to every acre, regardless whether you're growing a crop or not. We've talked about that here. We've all backed off from that, saying we're not really sure yet. But all of their information and their budgets that they've developed were based on the satellite imagery. And they went and they had growers bring it back. I don't know if you got a chance to go in and visit on your budget.
I
and
did,
see.
yeah.
I know they went in and some people said this budget isn't right for me, and they made adjustments and they looked at why it may have been off. But for the most part, people were like, okay, that's what I'm using. Now I know where I have to start to try and match. And they're going to move forward with implementing that. And they're using satellite to help understand consumptive use. And that's what we're suggesting is a similar process, whether it's Land IQ, whether it's Cal Poly's metric, whether it's one of the others that might exist out there.
Well, just generally speaking, if we're going to just ratchet back 2%, 6%, we're going to be farming half the ground that we're farming. Or we have to come up with a proposal that if you want to keep your ground, you got to pay someone else not to farm.
And I think,
It's that-
Ralph, what we got to remember is we got to look back at what Stephanie has just said. This plan has to be submitted. It is going to be flexible. We can resubmit it. So right now, I think for sake of time, we're in this 1 hour. So I think we need to move on. We can always come back to other things. Does anybody else on the committee have anything else on this item? Seeing none. Oh, we'll go to public comment.
Yeah, I hate to belabor this. I'm Rick Iger with Provo and Pritchard Consulting, representing Clayton Water District down in the Chowchilla Basin. So I've heard a couple confusing things today, and it sounds like some of the advisory committee members may be confused, as I am, based on what I read in the plan and what I'm hearing today. But somebody threw out this, you're going to have to cut all the way down to half an acre foot per acre. I don't think that's what's in the plan. I think what they presented on the slides is, there's going to be a series of projects and things that are going to get implemented as well as reduction. So when you have these percentages going down to 2040, it's not to take you all the way down to half an acre foot per acre, it's to take you down to some other number. So can staff maybe clarify that a little bit so the advisory committee is aware? Because I think it's like 1.5 foot reduction. It's not a, it's not 2 acre foot reduction, something like that.
So what is in the plan for the Chowchilla subbasin was estimating about 1,400 acre feet a year with a total of about 28,000 acre feet of demand reduction for our 45,000 current irrigated acres. Is that the right number? Sorry. Yeah, 43,000 irrigated acres in the Madera Madera County GSA in the Chowchilla subbasin. There's about 43,000 acres. Now, if you just easy math, say they're consuming 2 acre feet, that's about 80, add a little bit more because they're all over 2 on average. So what are we, probably about 90 to 100,000 acre feet of consumption. That's got to drop by about 28,000 acre feet in the Chowchilla subbasin. In the Madera subbasin, the number is in a similar manner. There's about 180,000 of consumption, and I think we need to drop down to where we're at about 90,000. Now, when you start looking at the other numbers, and this was something that was raised and brought forward, we had a lot of people saying, well, I need to be able to plan. So how much water am I going to get per acre? What's our answer? What am I going to have? I want to be able to make a decision and understand things. So through that, we said, all right, well, if you take the native water that falls as rainfall and seeps in the ground across the entire we'll use the Madera subbasin. Madera subbasin county GSA land area, which of course by happenstance is also about 180,000 acres. So we got, in one case, we use about 180,000 acre feet on about 90,000 acres. And we have a total of about 180,000 acres in the Madera County GSA in the Madera subbasin. All the rain that falls and all the ground that seeps in on that gives us a bucket of water. And if you divide that bucket of water across 180,000 acres, that's about a half an acre foot per acre equivalent. That's where the half an acre foot comes from. So there's about 90,000 acre feet of rainfall that's percolating and stream flows that are percolating from water coming in into the subbasin, in the Madera subbasin. And when people were saying, well, how much is that per acre? And if you remember the conversations where we were saying, well, does that 90,000 acre feet of native water go just to growers, or does it go to everybody, or how do we look at that? We just said, look, easy math, divided by all the land, that's a half an acre foot an acre. But I want us all to be thinking about, we need to look at the big picture, because exactly how we do that and how we start sharing that, whether it's through fee structures and buying people's demand down or doing things like that, there's a variety of opportunities. The point is we got to get from A to B. We're not really sure, going to the other point, exactly where B is down here. We know it's a lot lower than we are today, and there's a significant lift, and so we're going to start moving in that direction. And we got to be able to demonstrate that to our partners in the basin, so MID and the other members of the GSP, and we need to start being able to demonstrate it to DWR, because in our annual reports and our 5-year update, if we're not showing progress towards some sort of sustainability, we're inviting the state in.
Do we have
I don't
any
know if
other?
that helps, Rick. I don't know if that helps answer your question at all.
A little bit.
All I'm getting is more lineup of people.
I don't think you quite answered it, but
Look at what I triggered.
I had one other issue, and that was regarding the using this crop ET method to figure out how much reduction in demand there is, because some of the areas that we've studied, particularly down in the Clayton Water District area, are near some streams, near the rivers, Fresno River, San Joaquin River, and the water table's fairly shallow, so the crops are actually using water out of the ground without having to pump groundwater. And it wouldn't be fair to charge somebody because their ET was the same as if they irrigated, and they're not irrigating. So you need some way to be able to tie it back to, the well water use. And so maybe it's a combination of meters and ET or something, or maybe there's some spot studies done in different conditions depending on where your vicinity is to shallow groundwater. But don't get locked into just using one method, please, because it will affect some of your landowners.
Thank you. Wayne?
Hi, Wayne Cedarquist. A question I would have, you said you're using a half-acre foot available native groundwater, but I think that doesn't reflect reality. Yes, that's projecting it over the entire area, but if half of that area is in the foothills, water can't be pumped, water can't be utilized. That water ends up being available to the area as a whole. So are you not kind of overestimating the amount of deficit in a way? Because there's a whole half-acre foot times roughly half of the area that should be available for use.
So this is why I keep trying to come back to the bucket picture. There's about 90,000 acre feet of native water available to this county GSA in the Madera subbasin. There's an equivalent number, and it's not on the top of my head, for the Chowchilla subbasin. So we have 90,000 acre feet of rainfall and stuff to use. If we want to use 9 acre feet on 1,000, on whatever that would be, 9,000 acres? No, something. Anyway, whatever the number is, 10,000 acres at 9 acre feet an acre. If that's the decision, then that's the bucket we have to work with. So I think I want to focus there rather than getting caught up right now, because we haven't really figured out the right way to try and get reduction occurring. But rather than trying to go where you're discussing, well, the half of that land is the one using it. Well, yeah, but other people could put in pumps and start to pump it, right? So we got issues about how to deal with that. And we've spent a lot of time at prior meetings here talking about those various allocations and ways to look at it with crops only, with spread to everybody, a variety by different crop types and things like that. So I would just caution again that what we're talking about is there's a bucket that we're trying to work within. To be sustainable, we really only have on average about 90,000 acre feet to work with. Currently, the land that's using that 90,000 is using 180,000. Whether more land uses the 90,000, whether less land uses the 90,000, whether the same land uses less per acre to fit within that, that's just different ways to skin the cat. I don't know if that answered your question or helps at all.
It does. I understand totally what you're saying, but I think Kevin has an awfully valid point there. If we end up putting in writing a 6% a year reduction, that is a number a lot of farmers are going to see and panic on. I could see certain people in the state bureaucracy seizing on that number and saying, gee, you guys only did a 6 or 3% reduction per year over the last 5 years. There are many ways to skin the cat, as you pointed out, but it seems to me that starting with an assumption that is artificially low, making the situation worse than it needs to be, is causing a lot of problems too. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. Any other public comment?
Paul Provenzano. And I had a question. It looks to me like this plan, if we implement it the way it's set up, is dependent on the procurement of surface water rights. Could you maybe elaborate on how dependent the plan is on obtaining those rights?
The plan, so the two GSPs, again, we presented today this Chowchilla GSP, and last advisory committee, we presented the overview of the Madera the Madera joint GSP. In both of those, they make assumptions about acquiring, doing recharge, both capturing kind of wet weather flow, and then potentially doing some summertime irrigation with surface water instead of groundwater as an in lieu recharge benefit. And the orders of magnitude are in the plan. I don't recall them all offhand exactly. The table here for the Chowchilla one just happens to be in front of me, and that was capturing, like along the bypass, maybe every 3 or 4 years, 70 to 80,000 acre feet a year. in those years when it could be available, and then repumping that over the next 3 or 4 years. And so that is one source. Another source would be picking up 215 water under the federal contract, which has been available in a couple of recent years. The orders of magnitude of those vary. Getting water rights for some of those are a process, and you aren't guaranteed you'll get those rights, and they're depending on water availability and other senior users of water, since we are in a first come, first serve basis on appropriative water rights. So there's a fair amount of detail that was in each of the plans talking about some of these concepts. And, there's a heavy lift to get all that water, for sure. Maybe that's what your point is.
Right.
Is there's a lot of effort to acquire those supplies. The 215 is probably is easy to at least get access to, but now we have the issue of delivery, because we would need Madera Canal to provide that delivery mechanism for that water out of Millerton, and then be able to get it out to landowners in the White area. Will require conveyance agreements with parties who opt with the Madera Canal Water, what are those called? Is it called the Water Authority? Whatever, the JPA that operates the Madera Canal, which is a combination of Chowchilla Water District and Madera Irrigation District. We'd need conveyance agreements to be able to move water. And then if we need to take it into any laterals of either of those entities or discharge it into a river to then pull back out, there's a variety of other permits or conveyance agreements we would need. So there's, even the 215 water takes some effort to acquire, but it's all doable, and we intend to get some of it.
The other concern I have is that won't there be a lot of other agencies who will be attempting to procure this water, and won't we have a considerable amount of competition in obtaining this water?
Yes, that's right. But the direction of the Board of Supervisors and the direction or the advice from the advisory committee was to pursue additional water supplies first and then talk about demand reduction. And so that's the direction the plan went. And I think that's actually strong supply side demand management. But yes, we're going to have to revise based on our success with an annual report every year and then a new report every 5.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Jeff?
Jeff Vandenheuvel with Milk Producers Council. Just want to thank the advisory committee for forming a livestock ad hoc task force or subcommittee. Those of us in the dairy industry in particular don't always know what everybody else, we take for granted that everybody knows the way our businesses are organized, and just thought it'd be good to probably mention we had a good livestock meeting before this meeting, and it struck me and maybe others that there is a certain amount of farming that's associated with a dairy, and it's in ag vernacular, it's called row crops, right? It's corn, it's winter forage, and it could be perceived to be low value. And I've heard comments say, we'll buy, the row crop guys won't be able to compete for water. It's very important to remember that every dairy operation in Madera County and in California operates under a permit from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, which requires a nutrient management plan. And all of that farming that is associated with that dairy serves not just to raise feed for the cattle, which is very important, but also to balance the nutrient load that the cattle produce. So if you just look at what corn's worth or what wheat might be worth, you don't get the value of that land to that dairy operation. And dairy operations, of course, are 365-day-a-year job generators. There's a lot of employees that it takes to run the dairy, but then once that milk leaves the dairy, all the way through the economic chain until it finally ends up at a Thrifty ice cream cone. And you think of all the different hands that have touched that. And so dairy industry, gets a lot of criticism, but it's a tremendous economic engine. But it all starts with the cow, and it starts with that farm ground that's around that dairy. So it's something that's important to keep in mind, and I want to compliment the advisory committee here for recognizing that there are some unique issues there that require maybe some additional focus, and so we appreciate having a livestock task force to more thoroughly discuss those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, and I think a lot of that recognition should go to Stephanie because she's the one that really, along with the Board of Supervisors.
Christina.
I'm sorry, Christina Beckstedt. Thank you. With that, we're moving on to item number 6, update on funding. Mike Linden and Stephanie.
Okay, I'm going to walk you through a GSA fee presentation. It's part of what we're going to show the Board of Supervisors on Tuesday. These are the parts to the presentation. We'll look briefly at the organizational structure for fees, public outreach that we've done, schedule update, review policy, and then a budget for the county GSAs, and look at a couple options, and then talk about next steps. So you've seen this from last month, the Madera County GSAs. There's 3 of them, one for each subbasin where we operate. And we're looking at the GSA fee option right now, not the GSP projects. In terms of outreach, where we've discussed the fee, we've taken it to the September board meeting. We'll take it to the October board meeting on Tuesday. I spoke briefly about it at Clayton Water District in their public session. We've talked at the advisory committee. Chowchilla Water District wanted me to talk to it, so I did that as well, and the RCD, as well as Gravelly Ford. So to be clear, Gravelly Ford is not affected directly by the fee, nor is Chowchilla Water District. They're just curious what we're doing. So here's the schedule for the fee. At the October 8th meeting, we're going to select a way to move ahead with the fee. And then we will publish a study on the fee online. We'll put it on maderacountywater.com. And then we'll do public noticing in the newspaper. We're required to do it 2 weeks. We have enough time to do 3 weeks. And then they will vote, the Board of Supervisors, at the November 12th meeting. And hopefully we will see revenue if the fee is adopted in 2020 at the end. So authority to do this comes from Prop 26, not Prop 218. This is defensible with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and the Water Code. It is the least costly, least time-consuming, and most efficient option for doing a fee. This will allow us to operate as a water agency. It doesn't require periodic readoption. Yep.
Hello, members of the committee. Mike Linden, Deputy County Counsel. Just to add on the last bullet point there, fees can and do oftentimes require adjustment because one thing about a fee such as this, that it cannot exceed what is necessary. So what is necessary, depending on what happens, can change over the years. So, but yes, there can be adoptions, adjustments to the fee as time goes on.
Yeah, and I think the recommendation from Raftellus, which is the rate consultant, is to come back every 5 years and look at the fee again. So we had direction at the last Board of Supervisors meeting to look at levying the fee for irrigated acreage after evaluating all of the options. In terms of a budget for the GSAs, we have 5 major categories, things that are required by law for us to do, like the data management system that Greg spoke of earlier. That's a requirement that we all, within the subbasins, contribute data to a larger database, and that can have data pulled out of it for an annual report. There's a professional services category. This would include things like engineering consulting, the rate consultants for the 218, legal, that sort of thing. There's staff, administrative costs, and then a contingency. You're allowed to have a prudent reserve in case anything comes up. You look like you're about to say something, Bill.
I'm just intently listening.
All right. This is what the budget looks like. So Raftellus is the rate consultant, and they looked at other GSA's budgets to make sure we were within line and we're not forgetting anything as well. So those are the categories I spoke of, and I can kind of go into more detail if you'd like. The regulatory requirements, for example, include part of the 5-year update cost, as well as an annual report, the data management system, and then Landsat technology. In terms of professional services, this is that engineering, legal, rate consultant. We would hire someone to work with the CBP contract. We would do an engineering study in terms of what buying and retiring land would look like. That would lead into the 218. We would probably have someone on hand to support the water market. We have funding for the water market strategy for the first year, but not beyond that. And then we will probably need someone to churn out what it would look like to do extraction rates, rates for extraction of water. So that is what the budget looks like. Here is what it looks like in terms of a fee. So Kim Witten, who is in our department, has spent an enormous amount of time with assessors' data. And so we have irrigated agriculture, which we've pulled. This is just county GSAs. We also have some pieces of land that are classified as grazing or rangeland, but are irrigated. So that's that small $3,000 number. There's an other category that has a variety of things that couldn't be classified elsewhere, but it includes some industrial, schools fall in there, golf courses, and then there's the residential, which we've been told not to assess or to explore not assessing. So that's what you look like as one option. So you can see there's $23 for the irrigated ag, and then there's the other, which is $17. The other isn't being assessed for the regulatory fee category. So this is one proposal. And then there's another proposal in which everyone just pays the same amount of $22 per irrigated acre. So our next steps would be, we'll go to the board on the 8th. Hopefully they will give us some direction in terms of which of those options they want, and then we will prepare a report for October 21st publication and then start the noticing period. So that concludes my report. I'd be glad to take your questions.
I have one.
Yes, sir.
A person I know pretty darn well.
Okay.
Has spring water that irrigates because it runs into the basin. Is there an intention to assess naturally flowing spring water?
There isn't an intention to do that. We're using the assessor's database. So
Could it be mentioned in the regulatory language?
It
Like
could
call
be.
Jack Rice?
So I would want to see how that particular piece of property is classified to make sure it's classified correctly. I took out 2 or 3 slides, which if you come to the Tuesday meeting, you can see, which includes how we scrubbed the data, which was pretty extensive. No one has ever pulled out, out of 2019 data, all of the county GSA pieces before and taken a look at them. And Kim Witten worked many hours on getting things so that they were close to right. That said, because of how things are classified, sometimes you're going to want to give us feedback that something's not quite right, and we are open to that.
Still like to call it Jack Rice when the public, time for the public.
What was that?
Do we have any other?
I think it's too much money.
Okay.
I think it's too much money. I mean, the plan I had everybody spends $50 an acre to help retire land on the people that had the 90,000 acres, generated like $4.5 million, and that was to retire land to solve the problem. You guys are $2.3 million just to fool with paper. I mean, I think it's well, you know what? Maybe we'd be better off if we told the state, you know what, we don't know how to fix this. Why don't you guys come and do it? And listen, and if everybody did that, I want to see how the state's going to fix all the problems in the state. They can't even fix San Francisco's problems. Maybe that's what we should do.
Any other public comment? I mean, any committee members' comments? Seeing none. Christina?
Was that a yearly budget?
Yeah.
2.4?
Yeah.
That is a yearly budget.
Can you believe it? Let the state come in and see what they're going to do. Oh my God. That's too much.
Christina?
I have a clarifying question. The $2.4 million budget, that's for all of the GSAs, or is that individual GSAs?
The county GSAs.
So
Just
that's
the county.
three. All three of them are, that's what I meant, that all
They're
of them.
lumped
Okay.
together.
That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Well, and we did not include a fee comparing this to what other water agencies are paying, but we have McMullen, which is paying $19 an acre. We have in MID and Chowchilla, them charging a per acre rate, which is a lot more than this fee. This is what we need in order to be a water agency. And you're right, there are options like turning everything over to the state.
Right. What's Merced? Somebody said Merced is $6 an acre foot.
Yeah, it's not paying for all that this is paying for.
Jack?
Jack Rice with the Madera Ag Water Association. So I think this is a clarifying question is that goes to Clay's point is land that is not irrigated with groundwater is not intended to have this fee assessed to it? So if it's irrigated with surface water, it's not, I'm sorry.
I'm terrible with double negatives. So we're using the assessor's database for how that land is classified. So if it's classified as irrigated ag, it fell into acres that we were assessing. Now, if it's assessed with surface water and we don't know that, that would be something we would need to go in and figure out. But yes, if it's irrigated ag, it fell into that category.
So I think that would,
Can I
sorry.
add a clarifier on your question? Clarifier of a clarifier. Are you suggesting it would be a parcel of land that is irrigated but uses zero groundwater that is in the Madera County GSA white area?
Correct.
Is there such a thing that's irrigated with no groundwater whatsoever?
Well, I think that if I understand that the scenario that Clay described, it's spring water. There's a piece of ground that.
So there are probably a few, and I think Stephanie addressed that may require some special attention, but I would imagine that is a significant minority.
Right, but in that case, the attention would there be some way of saying like that's not what we're intending to charge?
I think the intention would be to double the charge on Clay.
It's kind of an ad hominem. There you go.
Yeah. I'm just joking, but I think, just similar to all situations, we're trying to create something that you try and create something that's simple, that has to be applied universally, but every one of those cases, you're going to have some anomalies, and so long as there's some ability to address those, we want to try and take that into account, but at the same time, you can't try and figure out, well, you're only using this much, and you're only using that much, and we can do that when we're talking about funding projects and fallowing and all this other stuff. When we start getting to that aspect, that might be where you get into fee structures for how much you pump and other things. But right now, this is kind of in order to administer, to do the studies that are necessary to take the next steps, to deal with what the state requires. And by the way, Ralph, the state charges are significantly higher. I can pull them up. I'll look for them, but they're
higher. If they come in and
they come in
on you,
if
they're going to charge you more money than that.
Absolutely.
$10 an acre foot if it's got a meter on it, 25 if it's unmetered, and 40 if you're in a probationary basin. If they do the work for you, it's $55 an acre foot.
But that's on top of an initial cost. There's a flat
Like
cost.
$300 a well or something?
$300 a well or something like that, plus cost per every acre. I mean, there's all sorts of, it gets expensive fast.
This pot of money that eventually will probably be created, who controls how it's spent? No.
The Board of Supervisors controls.
Board of Supervisors?
Yes.
We need to go talk to them. Can we attend that meeting?
Yes, it's a public meeting. That's why I'm
Where
telling
is
you
it?
about it ahead of time. 10 o'clock Tuesday.
Here?
Yes,
What
there
day?
is,
What
there
day?
is a,
Tuesday.
and I'm not trying to dissuade you. There are other items on the agenda, so just prepare yourself.
Thank you, Jack. Jared?
Apologize, Chairman, I came in late. I'm in the middle of almond harvest. I'm lucky I'm even here. I just had two quick thoughts. One, is it fair to assume that over time that fee will increase due to the fact that if it's a per acre fee, you're going to have reduced acreage? And then two, is it also fair to assume that due to the likelihood of inflation, this will need to be adjusted as well within the time frame of this project, since we're looking over 20, 25 years?
So you can put some sort of consumer price index in it so that it escalates at 2 or 3% a year. In terms of whether or not it would increase as acres came out of production, I think it's possible that it would decrease at first as we dial in on the budget. So I don't anticipate much increase.
So then the share per actual farmed acre most likely wouldn't be impacted? Because if you have a budget of $2.1 million and you take your percent of irrigated land down by 2% annually, increasing to 6% annually,
Right.
the share per actual produced acre should increase.
So what we would do is come back every 5 years and recalculate things. And in 5 years, we would have many more real costs. Right now, I have estimates from going to vendors, right, for an annual report, for a DMS. These are the best costs that we have, and this is a very short window in which we're able to do this.
Thank you.
Rick?
Thank you, Rick Iger again. Maybe this is a lead into the next agenda item, but do you envision an advisory committee to the Board of Supervisors on how to direct the use of the funding?
So I don't want to necessarily jump into that presentation, but the advisory committee would give feedback on implementation, which is obviously, this is not funding implementation, but it is helping to do the studies for that.
No additional public comment?
I got a question.
Ben?
On that, I forgot, never mind. Should have wrote it down.
We can always come back in item number 9, Ben, so if, when we get back there, if it comes back to you, you can touch it then. Moving on to item number 7, advisory committee structure. Mike Linden and Stephanie.
So we don't have a formal report on this. We are going to take an item to the Board of Supervisors October 8th as well to talk through the advisory committee structure, just as we did last year. The Board of Supervisors appoints people for one-year terms. So you'll recall last year at this time I was talking about, well, what would happen if we took 3 committees, the Madera, the Chowchilla, and the Delta Mendota, and combined them into one committee. So we had feedback from the board. They thought that was a good way to move ahead. We moved ahead with that plan for this year. We have had some feedback about the committee this year, mainly that it is too ag-centric. So I'm going to present a couple of options to the Board of Supervisors. They can accept an option I present. They can suggest modifying an option. They'll listen to public comment. They can send me back to the drawing board entirely. Those are all options that are out there, but that will be October 8th. They could also have it come back to a meeting at a later date. So that's just my quick update on that.
Can you tell us what the options are?
I can, from memory, hopefully. Option 1. In the Madera Subbasin, there could be a residential rep, a DAC rep, and an ag rep. Same thing for the Chowchilla Subbasin, and then Delta Mendota, it would be maybe someone at large. So that's option one. You could also modify that. Greg and I thought we're talking. We said, well, what if we put 2 ag reps on each one? You could do that scenario. Keep in mind what we're trying to do is create a balanced committee that does what Sigma's trying to do, which is bring all beneficial users to the table. Option 2 is from my old job. They do small, medium, and large pumpers, right? So small pumpers are typically residents, and medium pumpers could be farmers. They could also be businesses, processors of some type. And then large would probably be an ag seat. So we could do a small, medium, and large pumper for Madera and Chowchilla, and then at large for Delta Mendota. Option 3, and you'll enjoy getting into my brain at this point. Option 3 is I come up with all of these different categories. So it includes maybe someone who does permanent crops, maybe someone who does row crops, someone who's on a domestic well, someone who's in a water system, because water systems are part of the GSA as well. We have Madera Valley Water System and Clayton Water District, as well as Sierra Vista, and those haven't been as represented in the committee. So I also had a livestock seat in that version. And then option 4, Greg and I created based on proportions of land use. This is where you'll really enjoy my brain, right? So this is the mathier one, where the seats are assigned based on how the land within the subbasin GSAs are allocated, right? So it turns out, well, half the land is grazing, so that would give you half of the seats that would be grazing or rangeland seats. And then of those that remain, some would be permanent, maybe some would be row, and then there would be some residential options. So this is really a committee for the Board of Supervisors. It's to give advice on GSP for right now, formation, and then implementation. It's kind of their call on how they would like to balance it. But I would also suggest that we have everybody reapply and try to get some new folks on here as well. I've had a fair amount of interest over the past year and a half of other people wanting to join, and they haven't been, other than adding the self-help seat when Alejandro resigned. So that's kind of what's on the table. Yes, Mike would like to make a comment.
Yes, just for clarification, one thing we're doing next week is just for structure. Stephanie talked about applying and so forth, that will come later. And, then we'll go back to the board as to who will be in the seats. But next week is just for the structure.
Jim, anything else?
We just completed a presentation that showed that of the 2.4 million, essentially 100% of it was going to come from irrigated agriculture. So it seems to me that the old taxation without representation idea is at play here. I think that we need to be very careful. I mean, these are big issues that affect all of the community, and I think we need people on the committee that are certainly focused on the best interests of the community at large, but we also need people in the community that understand macroeconomics, microeconomics, farming, because that's well over 80% of what we're talking about here, and people who, frankly are fairly clear thinking, people who are capable of dealing with very challenging community issues. So the committee, the standard for the committee is a high one, and we need people on it that are very capable.
Anybody? Just keep it short, please.
I'll keep it real short. Stephanie?
Yes.
Are we taking on kind of this, here. Stephanie, are we taking on kind of the course that the state government does when they appoint people to the Department of Water Resources? The governor appoints people that have no tie to water problems at all. It's kind of like political, favors they put out. And I think what Jim said is very true. if all the problem is coming from agriculture and all the hurt is going to come from agriculture, agriculture has to be a component part of the solution. And what you're basically coming up with in your free time to think about stuff is ways to eliminate people that, confront you a little bit. All right? Because what we have, we are vested in a solution. Believe me. You saw the solution I presented to you.
But here's the problem. I don't hear a lot of disadvantaged community voices right now.
But there's a public thing over here where they can come and talk.
That is not a fair implementation. That's not what SIGMA means. There needs to be a whole dialogue up here, and I am not in any way trying to shut farmers out, but I am trying to present some options for rebalancing the committee.
Everything a person says before but doesn't count. So when you say, I am not trying to shut farmers out, but that doesn't count. Everything you said after but is what I listened to. Okay, so, that's not a double negative. That's pretty clear. All right, so what I'm saying is this. The solution resides in the ones that created the problem. We created the problem. We need to figure out a solution that works without destroying what we're trying to save here. That's all I'm saying. And I'm saying that not anyone, just because you pick them out at random in a lotto, doesn't mean that it's going to come up with a better answer.
Vicki?
Mike would like to comment.
Actually, why don't we let Vicki go ahead?
What I was going to say was that I agree, there does need to be representatives that understand this completely, fully. But there does need to be that voice of a disadvantaged community, and that's where I come from. And whether I did or didn't, and don't understand, that doesn't mean that we don't have the same need. Now, you said that the representatives in here should be the ones that started with this and find the solution, but are you going to look out for me?
Let me tell you something. I hire so many people, and believe me, I'm working for a lot of people that get paychecks, all right? I do look out for you. I've built facilities, housing. I've done a lot of stuff. Believe me, I do.
But I'm not only just talking about a disadvantaged person. I'm talking about someone who owns a domestic well that lives right next door to a farm, which I do.
Yeah.
All the way around.
Yes.
And then your well goes down and so on. But,
Yeah, there has to be something
But my
done.
question is, can we get other representatives, like you said, instead of just picking anybody, like Self-Help Enterprises or like Leadership Council, to be on this committee?
Fine.
Sure, that's a matter of having the seat designated like we did with Alejandro for self-help.
And to Committee Member Maxwell's point, as to the brains that we certainly have brought here and have developed, that is actually the next step when we talk about the persons who will remain on the committee. And that's certainly a very valid point. But as to Ms. Agnesson's point, as to the advisory committee, what its role is, and I don't have the board letter going back a couple of years, but I was there in the beginning when it was formed. It is a tool, we are a tool for stakeholder outreach, all beneficial users of water, and obviously to Ms. Ortiz's point, yes, one very important one where we live are disadvantaged communities, and sounds like that person from Leadership Council may have more to say about that during public comment, but this is all what we'll talk about with the board, and we will find an appropriate balance.
Ma'am?
Yes, I just wanted to comment. My name is Lisbeth.
Lisa, yeah, we need you to speak into a microphone, please.
There you
Thanks.
go. I didn't know about that. My name is Lisbeth. I represent Self-Help Enterprises today. And I just wanted to add to the conversation is that I think it's important to have different perspective because it's by having these different perspectives of different groups and interests, we will be able to find a better solution. So I think it's coming together, and I hope that this committee
in the future have these different perspectives. Because I really think on the opportunity to think together in the solution. And for that, you need different perspectives. And the only way to bring that to the table is having those representatives sitting at the table. Self-help enterprises and leadership council can represent them, but at the same time, if we can build the capacity for these different groups, disadvantaged communities or residentials, to represent themselves and bring their perspective to the table, it's better.
So I just wanted to report on the livestock meeting this morning, or this afternoon.
Oh, so we have it under the director's report. So we're not quite there.
Oh, we're not? Oh, man.
We're still.
Gosh, I thought we flipped pages already. Okay, keep going.
Maybe I should,
Kevin?
maybe I should make a comment.
Oh, go ahead, Clay.
Public perception may be that I'm irrigated agriculture. I'm not. I don't irrigate an acre, other than what is fed by spring water, as mentioned. I don't pump for that, other than my yard. I have 4 houses that I supply water to from 3 water systems. And I'm also concerned about the drop in the valley water table, and it's incrementally moving in my direction. So I just wanted to make that statement.
Thank you, Clay. Kevin?
Hello? There we go. Stephanie's proposal, well, she had numerous proposals. And, yeah. And, yes, your mind is a little scary. We dig down deep there. But I share your passion for statistics. And we need to have inclusion from people besides farmers. And, but we don't want to have taxation without representation, as Jim so eloquently put it. So I'm just wondering if, Mr. Chairman, it might be in our best interest to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors which one of Stephanie's recommendations we want to encourage them to adopt.
So you can't make a recommendation because we didn't agendize it. We're kind of, I have to take this to the board because your appointments are only for a year. So this was really just me doing what I think is a courtesy and letting you guys know we're going to have a couple options out there. But the board cares about your feedback, right? So the best place to give them feedback, I think, is in the public comment at the end of that item.
Well, what if we had a discussion or took a non-binding vote as to what we would recommend, and you could just, when you make your presentation, you could let the supervisors know that this was the desire of the majority or the unanimous consent of the committee.
Unfortunately, that would be against the rules of order that we have for the committee. It's not agendized as an action item, and so,
You don't want to vote on your own existence. It's like not a thing in public agencies. You just don't do it. Let the people who appoint you make a decision and give them feedback that way.
I don't want the supervisors thinking that we're battling amongst ourselves or with staff. I think one of the proposals you have there is a really good compromise. And I'd love to be able to figure out a way to communicate that to the supervisors.
So I would come to the meeting on October 8th and voice that to them.
Okay.
Mike? No?
yes, and you have the option of submitting anything in writing as well, which would be part of the record.
No. And we read that.
Is this an action item for the 8th, or is this a discussion item?
They can take action on the 8th.
They can decide what it's going to be on the 8th.
On the structure, not on the appointees. That's really a separate process. But keep in mind, it has to go to the board. This is the same thing we did last year. So we're just attempting to give them some options in terms of structure.
Who picks the board, you?
The committee?
Yeah, the committee. I think last time it was your position, wasn't it?
So I don't know how those positions were selected last time, but I would ask a bunch of department heads to review.
Any other comment from the committee? Seeing none, we'll go to public comment. Oh,
One more.
Just one other thought when you're thinking about committee members. I think that it would be informative if you reviewed the attendance record of this committee for the past year. There are people up here who are here every time because their very future, in a desperate way, depends on the outcome of all this. So they've been here, they've been present, and they've been at work.
And you probably recall that's how we chose people for this committee, was based on the previous year's attendance.
now we'll go to public comment.
Hi, good afternoon. Madeline Harris from Leadership Council. I just wanted to thank Stephanie for leading this conversation, and also to remind everybody that according to, at least my understanding of the draft GSP so far, agriculture does account currently for 95% of groundwater being pumped in the Madera subbasin, which I think, as we can all agree, does make the conversations that we have here at this advisory committee rather difficult when it comes to demand reduction and when it comes to assessing fees. So, while I agree that agriculture should continue to be represented on the advisory committee into the future, I do think that we need to work at diversifying the advisory committee, so that it is compliant with SGMA when SGMA says that we have to consider all beneficial users, and B, so that there isn't a conflict of interest in reducing our usage of groundwater here on out into the future, because that is one of the things that we are going to have to do to become sustainable by 2040. So our organization supports making the advisory committee a more diverse representation of all the beneficial users in the subbasin. Thank you.
Chad?
Jack Rice with the Madera Ag Water Association. I appreciate the need to grapple with the makeup of the committee and work through that again, and it's certainly a challenging issue. I think the proposal we talked about, understanding this was going to be coming up, the MAWA group talked about it and grappled with this as well, and the goal is to find a way that the committee retains the capacity to provide complete advice, giving this kind of solid advice to the GSA, which is the County Board of Supervisors in this case. And so to do that, you obviously need the breadth of representation, residential, disadvantaged communities, and agriculture. But, adding in or addressing the fact that there's a kind of a disproportionate, if that's the right word, effect of being in agriculture or being on agriculture is pretty key, and that comes whether it's the supply side and you're going to be paying for projects or paying for the GSA administration, or the demand side as well. So that impact, balancing that impact with the need to have the diverse discussion, as Madeline pointed out, and you pointed out too, you end up with a better proposals put forward, better thinking, you might say. And we can, the discussion we had at MAWA, they grappled with that, they understood it, but I think you described you described several, and setting aside the one that showed us a little too much insight into your mind and going with the first two. The one that had an additional ag seed in each of the basins was one that resonated well with the Madera Ag Water Association, and that idea of having essentially two ag, a residential and a disadvantaged community from each basin, made people feel comfortable that you would have the diversity of agriculture perspective also reflecting the impact, because there is a lot of diversity in the basin, and so addressing that component, diversity within ag and diversity within interests. So I think that's a great suggestion to go with if that comes up. Now, how that gets conveyed to the Board of Supervisors is a great point, but for the committee, that's my comment to the committee and to you as well.
Thank you, Jack.
Christina Beckstead, Madera County Farm Bureau. I echo all of Jack's remarks, but I want to add another layer, if I can, for staff to consider as you present to the board, and then the committee to also take into consideration. As most of you are aware that are in the room, there was an advisory or ad hoc committee of the advisory committee for the livestock group, the livestock ad hoc committee earlier, and I think it's important that livestock is represented on this committee as well as an identified seat. I'd also take it one step further and say that your alternates, because as it stands right now, the alternates are just at-large alternates, that maybe there be some consideration taken that each category, if you will, so your ag seat, your DAC seat, and your residential seat be actual identified alternate seats. So you end up with 3 alternates, 1 for ag, 1 for DAC, 1 for residential. And then as members of this committee, it is your responsibility that if there's an ag person missing or a DAC person missing or a residential person missing, that you need to contact that person, the alternate, and say, hey, you're not going to be here. And you need that replacement. But just something to keep in mind. But I do echo all of Jack's sentiments. And Farm Bureau understands the need for the diversity, but there's also that taxation without representation thing that needs to be taken into consideration. And the 2 ag seats, I think, is an easier pill to swallow for ag as a whole in this, 2 ag seats per subbasin, if you will, with that at-large seat and a livestock seat. So thank you.
Thank you, Christina, and we will come back. Ralph, you had a comment?
Yeah, I had a comment.
Just keep it brief, please, so we
Okay,
can
real brief.
wrap this up.
Stephanie, I know before you took this job, I think Julia had it, and they selected the members of all these different advisory committees, and they were pretty much ag-based people that were affected, and the ones that most would impact the groundwater level. Is there any reason why it wasn't initially done with this great diversity of people?
So she did have residential seats, ag seats, and DAC seats.
Right.
Chosen in 2017 from people who applied. I think there were 33 or so applications. So she did choose people in those roles. Part of what happened is oftentimes people were really representing 2 seats. Perhaps they were representing the residential seat, but they also farmed. We had people in that category. So when we reorganized in 2018, we looked at attendance in 2018 for reorganizing in 2019. And we have folks in all sorts of seats right now. But I think part of what we see when we look at the committee is we do see a very big ag presence. And I agree that ag needs to come to the table and be part of this. So this is not about removing ag, but there is an urge from many people to look at how we might balance it differently. So that's what I will show them. Again, they can select an option, they can tweak an option, or they can send me back to the drawing board. These are all fine things, but I am required by the guidelines that set this up to do this at the end of each year.
Thank you, Stephanie, and with that, we'll move on to
I think you have another public comment.
Wayne.
A comment that I would have is ag is funding this whole major change is coming at us, depend in so many ways on our cooperation, our working to help achieve these goals. And that one proposal that talks about diluting ag to the point of 1 out of 3, I really think the board needs to think about the cooperation of ag in this. And I think the money to pay for this, 100% ag, I think we have a right to have greater representation because we're paying the bill, we're making the greatest sacrifices. I think if ag in general starts to feel like they're being put in a back seat, things are going to fall apart rather quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. Another public comment?
Good afternoon. My name is Cassandra Hishida. I just wanted to echo previous comments around support for diversifying representation in the committee, particularly for disadvantaged communities. To add another layer to the conversation, I just wanted to encourage consideration for those ag seats, socially disadvantaged farmers and smaller scale farmers, so representing also diversity within the agricultural committee. So with the Farmer Equity Act passing in 2017, there's a definition of socially disadvantaged farmers in California state law. So specifically farmers of color, And there's overlap in smaller scale farms for socially disadvantaged farmers as well, and that also includes women farmers. So just another consideration as we're diversifying representation for socially disadvantaged farmers to potentially be factored into that the different situations that were outlined, the 4 different possibilities. So thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra. And with that, we'll move on to item number 8, Director's Report. Stephanie?
Have a quick report. I know we've been here for a while, so I'm sorry about that, but those were good discussions and good feedback. So Ben, this is now your chance to do the livestock ad hoc committee update.
So we talked about a lot of things. We talked about some of the advantages of our dairies and other livestock. One thing I want to point out is that we are gathering data and how we can see the advantages of cattle and chickens. There's a lot of water return from the cattle usage. We are gathering data to find out how much water is returned back to the ground from the actual water that is pumped. And we are, with that advantage of presenting it to the board, I think we'll be able to not only to succeed at what our actual water uses, but also be able to get credits to be able to do projects on ours. So, and be able to make us sustainable as well.
Okay.
So my only thing is if anybody just propose any livestock, if they want to generate reports or data that can benefit our meeting based on how much water is returned from the cattle usage, that'd be great. So
And then your next meeting is before the next advisory committee, right?
that's correct.
Which is
What's our date?
November 7th at 2, so same time at 12:30?
Yeah.
Okay. And Javier is not here to report on the domestic well mitigation, so I'll give you a short summary. We met at the Farm Bureau. We talked a little bit that there's a data gap problem in terms of the number of domestic wells in Madera County. And Javier suggested what I think was a really good idea, which is kind of working backwards and figuring out how many homes there are, and then you can subtract off what you know are on community systems, mutuals, or county-owned systems. And then we can compare those records to what the county has. We have good data for about 10 years, not a lot more, and then we can compare that to what the Department of Water Resources has. When you drill a well, you turn something into them. So the key here is that we do not have a great data set to work with. So when we start talking about domestic wells, we don't have great numbers. There was a strong interest in moving things quickly when people's wells were failing and not making the application process burdensome to them. Greg was there and pointed out that we could prioritize monitoring wells in areas that were hot spots with a history of wells going dry or knowing the depths of them where we thought they might go dry. And then there was discussion of whether water quality could make one eligible for domestic well mitigation. So those are all what we discussed, and Vicki was there, and Bill, and Mike, and Greg. Does anyone want to add anything?
Just that the resolution of CV salts and whether or not the State Water Resource Control Board will adopt the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board's basin plan amendments and the result of those water quality management zones will all tie into this issue. Also, that recent state statute in regards to disadvantaged communities and funding for the resolution of that problem will also tie into this issue.
Thank you. Okay, I'm moving on. I just thought I'd make a short list of our ongoing projects in our department. That's a joke. It's not a short list. No one? Nothing. Okay. So in terms of GSP duties, I'm the plan manager for the joint GSP. We are also funded through a DWR grant, so we spend a fair amount of time managing that. We just did an RFP for data management systems, which Jeannie Hoppen led, and we'll be doing interviews sometime soon. We are looking at what it's going to take for an annual report with the GSPs. Those are all due April 1st. So just when you thought you were done turning something in by January 31st, you have another report due. There's also about a month right now to apply for some Prop 68 funding, which is the third round of funding that is available for GSP implementation. So we're working on that grant application. We also have a previous grant for groundwater monitoring wells. It was awarded to Ludorf and Scalmanini, and they've been drilling wells in the county right-of-way throughout the Madera and Chowchilla subbasins. These are monitoring wells, not drinking water wells. In terms of the GSA, we're working on that fee study that I just presented with Raftellus. We have our advisory committee and ad hocs. We did just sign the Water Market Strategy Grant and receive an executed grant from the Bureau of Reclamation. So we're bringing the contract to the board Tuesday to award that to a consultant. We are talking about how to augment supplies right now, and Greg and I are working on a CBP letter, and we're also talking with you all on demand reduction strategies, including the water market, potentially an allocation if that occurs. I am not going to remove that from my vocabulary, just so you know, even though we were told last time to do that. It's a word. We may have to use it at some point. It's at least a tool in the toolbox. I'm going to skip the next column, but there's a lot going on. Our flood control agency also is managed by an engineer, Dario Dominguez, and he is leaving to become the Director of Public Works for the City of Fowler, which is a great opportunity for him, but it does mean that our Department of 4 became a Department of 3 with the flood control agency as well. In terms of outreach, hopefully you received a bill stuffer that we put in property taxes. This went to 45,000 households. It urges people to call us, and some people did, and a lot more joined our mailing list. I told you about the Bureau of Reclamation grant. I just circled the date at the bottom. That's when we turned it in by, which was July of 2018. So just for those of us who feel like we don't move fast enough, sometimes that's why. You only get the contract like 15 months later. We also completed a small-scale recharge basin project with recharge at Ellis Basin. We have a MOU with Madera Irrigation District to take water for free. We split the credit of water in there. So we took, I'm backing up, putting the commas in the appropriate places, 99,726,691 gallons went into the ground, which is about 300 acre-feet. That concludes our activities of what we've been up to in the past month. I'd be glad to take your questions.
Thank you, Stephanie. Does committee have any comments? Seeing none, is there any public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 9, committee member comments. Does the committee have any other comments?
Yeah, just briefly, I want to kind of summarize. We had quite a discussion earlier, and semi-tropic got drug into it, but I want to kind of summarize what my understanding is from Madera County, is that we have this challenge of trying to quantify a 2% reduction, and we are talking about trying to volitionary get a reduction in acreage to match that 2% per year. And unfortunately, Jeff left. I wanted to let him know that my almonds are just as expendable as his cows. So, you know, in my mind's eye, this is just me speaking, is that I know that most likely the almond crop that I have on my out-of-district land has a very limited amount of time left. The projects that we are talking about are for my kids' re-employment initiation of production on that land. Probably won't happen in my career because I know how long it takes to complete projects in the state of California. And that window is 10 years plus. So that's just my own, mind and planned. So as far as the disadvantaged communities, I believe that that with proper mitigation and with implementation of new state statute, that those water and with the water quality management zones that are coming to us soon as the state adopts this basin plan amendment, which requires us to provide drinking water to any household whose water does not meet state quality standards. I believe that that problem has a solution that is already in motion. This idea that we need to generate funds to create voluntary fallowing, I mean, there's a number in my head where my almonds will come out and it will not get replanted until we have adequate water supplies. The idea is that with satellite imaging or something of that ilk, we can determine the amount of water being used on that parcel. Any water that I bring in that's surface water to be used there would be deducted from that number, and I pay some fee ratcheted on that water that's being used, which will be used for solving the problem. So anyhow, that's all I got.
Thank you, Bill. Ralph?
You know, a closing comment?
A brief one.
A brief one. I would say this. I would say we heard a lot of speakers here today. We've got a lot of different direction of how it should go. But I would address the people that came and spoke that want a place on the committee to realize this. You can have a seat, but the thing is, for the economy to work, you have to have jobs. To have jobs and to have an economy, you have to have people that are crazy enough to do the stuff that we do, that farm and risk and take a chance and gamble all in till the end of the year and hope you make it. All right. It's easy to vote somebody else's money and somebody else's fees and everything. But remember this. A lot of my friends have already left this state. They're gone. They're tired of it. And they're gone. And I thought that they would never stop farming and their history. And a lot more of them are selling all of their lands. And another option that is available to all of us here is to get out of this county and to move to a county like Yuba City, Woodland, where the water is abundant, no problems, and we just leave. And then it's just left to whatever. It could all be empty land, and all the self-help houses won't have any places to work. And that's what will happen. So this is a balancing act that we have to tread very carefully on, because it'll come crumbling down.
Yes, ma'am. Can you please turn on your microphone and please? Thank you.
The mic, you gotta use the mic.
Yeah, I didn't got that yet. I think we are on the same page. We want to protect the jobs of the communities that self-help serve. But I think it's also very important to protect and make sure that they have safe drinking water. So that is something that we think it is very important that we can sit at these tables, not just self-help, but these communities members, so that they can share with you what are their challenges as well, so that we can come up with solutions. So I'm not going like, yes, we want to preserve the viabilities of your, activities, but also make sure that they have quality of life. And for that is making sure that they have safe and affordable water. That's my only comment.
Thank you. With that, we will, first I want to thank Greg, Stephanie, Mike, Jeannie, I know is in the back, and Kim for your hard work. And with that, we will be adjourned. Thank you.